Thank you, and it's such a privilege to be here at this convening and be part of these conversations. I want to shout out, is Jesus, I know he's still in the room. I was also a philosophy major. There are philosophy majors in journalism. A lot of them end up in public media. But it's a great thing to think about, the lens in which we're going to approach this conversation. You know, Anne was just talking about how power can be for good, power can be for bad. We know that's also the case with technology, and in particular with artificial intelligence. So let's introduce our panel. And the way this morning's going to go is we're going to have a conversation, but we want this to be an information exchange. So please be thinking about questions that you want to ask. We will have a question time towards the end, so we can, we'll have a conversation here and with the room. But let's introduce the folks here who are going to be leading this great conversation. Justin Brown, we were just talking about different state officials. Former, in Oklahoma, you were the former director of the Department of Human Services from 2019 to 2023. Secretary Brown, you also served as the chairman of the American Public Human Services Association Leadership Council, as well as the member of the governing board of directors, and currently serves as CEO of Global True North, a public benefit corporation, and additionally has just founded in the past year the Center for Public Sector AI. So that's Justin. Afua Bruce is also with us, principal of ANB Advisory Group. When I asked her to explain, what kind of consulting work do you do, she had a great explanation. She said, we work with organizations that want to build responsible data and technology solutions. She's also the author most recently of The Tech That Comes Next, How Changemakers, Technologists, and Philanthropists Can Build an Equitable World. And finally, also with us, we have Raffi Krikorian, Chief Technology Officer at Emerson Collective, past and the first Chief Technology Officer of the Democratic National Committee. Raffi's also host of the Technically Optimistic podcast, where we've been asking when Kamala Harris is going to come on. After Joe Rogan, Raffi? So let's start with just a question for all of you. At Axios, we like to just sort of talk about a reality check. And I think when we're talking about artificial intelligence, that is probably desperately needed. So let me just start with an opening question to all three of you. How optimistic are you about what you're seeing right now? And what are you most concerned about when it comes to AI? Justin, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. Not a bad place to wake up, Aspen, Colorado, with the beautiful trees and mountains. So I come at this through the lens of government, specifically health and human services. A year ago, we founded the Center for Public Sector AI alongside of what now is about 18 current sitting health and human services secretaries, directors, and commissioners. One of them on my board, Public Sector Advisory Board, is here, Laura Zeilinger from DC DHS. So that's the lens through which I look at artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. I can't talk about this conversation without first acknowledging significant risk. And so that risk exists in many different places. But generally, of course, because I'm in this world, I am actually very encouraged about the potential for a number of reasons. One is we are coming out of a really major disruption in COVID-19. And there is a group of leaders in the health and human services system, which I would tell you is the most important system in the country, serving roughly a third of our nation's population, who is battle tested. They are strong right now. And while the pandemic is still here, they are ready to sort of shift their focus towards achieving the outcomes that they came to the system to achieve. So not only are the leaders battle tested, but they have a team of employees, thousands and thousands strong, who are also ready to achieve these outcomes for families and communities that they came to achieve. People come to work for HHS to do the good things. And so this group of leaders has come together to build a foundation of relationship and collaboration to address head-on the potential issues that may arise from emerging technologies in these really important systems, and to actually build HHS systems that serve humans and families instead of a bureaucracy that really is so difficult to navigate for the workforce and for the people that they serve. So I'm encouraged because of the people that I know who are really picking up the ball to do this the right way.
Who wants to go next? Either one.
I can go next. First. Thank you so much. And thanks to Aspen Institute for having me here today. So excited to be in conversation with you all. I come to this work as a computer engineer. My first internship as a software engineer, I did the math yesterday, it was more than 2 decades ago. And so, one, I'm older than I thought I was, but also have been wiser, thank you, than I thought I was, but also have been deeply embedded in computer engineering and engineering for a variety of causes for the past couple of decades. I have taken my work to the FBI, to managing a nonprofit that did data science and AI for mission-driven organizations around the world, and also being an adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon in this work. And so when I think about how AI is being used today, there are a lot of really wonderful use cases for AI and how it's being used. I've gotten to work with organizations that are using AI to better predict the growth path of forest fires. So you can better position where firefighters should be, you can better position where resources need to go, you can better position where shelters need to be placed for people to be able to have safety and to recover. I've gotten to work with organizations who are using AI to help improve graduation rates at community colleges and at four-year institutions where you have a lot of learners who are coming to school later in life, and so really need to make sure they get through not just the first year, but they get all the way to and through graduation. I've also gotten to work with organizations who are using AI to change the way some of how agricultural is done. And so to look at weather patterns to figure out when the best time to plant is, when the best time to harvest is, and things like that. So you can actually increase crop yields, you can respond to diseases more quickly and more efficiently, therefore yielding more food for the communities where people are farming in. The reality, though, is that most people don't have technical teams who can take the time and the effort to build these really complicated AI systems. And so a lot of people, I'm sure yourselves, have the pitches from a variety of very enthusiastic AI companies who have the latest and greatest solution for you. They will tell you in a variety of different tools. Some of those are helpful, some of those are less helpful. But I have seen a number of mission-driven organizations, nonprofits, and government agencies successfully use AI to do things like better get through email, to more quickly edit and refine grant applications, letters to donors, to do some research and things like that. So I think those are the positives. You also asked about negatives, though. I have a long list.
If you want to highlight them.
We don't have time for my long list of negatives.
Give me your top 2
things. But I was. Does anyone remember the show The Jeffersons?
Of course.
Okay, good. Oh, it's not just me. I was like, I watched the show just before I came. But the episode I was watching was this episode where Lionel, for those of you who aren't familiar, Jeffersons, very cool family, and Jefferson. Anyway, the son, Lionel, was in college. He's first in his family to go to college, and then he drops out because now he's too cool. He's like met everyone who he can party with. And then his girlfriend like finds him in the bar one night and is like, "You need to go back to school." And he's like, "I don't need to go back to school." And she says, "Well, what are you going to do with your life?" And he's like, "I'll just go over wherever the wind blows me." And her response is, "Well, careful, that's how trash collects." And I really feel like that's how we are with technology, and specifically with AI, is that a lot of times people are like, "Well, it's just an AI tool, just use it, like you'll figure it out, it'll be fine," or "We'll just figure out how to develop it, it'll be fine." And if we're not clear about what our goals are and what our strategies are to get there, with AI, we will be the trash that just collects.
I don't want to follow.
Wow.
Sorry. You're up, Raffi. Yeah, you're up, buddy.
I don't want to go next. So I come at this from a very much an engineering perspective. So like, I did all these fun things in politics and stuff like that. But before that, I actually was a VP of engineering at Twitter, not X, Twitter back in the day. I ran the self-driving car team at Uber for a while, so we actually got self-driving cars onto the road. So I sort of I've been living in sort of this AI-powered future for a while. I will also note you all have been too, maybe just not paying attention to it or maybe not realizing the words that are behind it, right? It's this generative AI wave that's mostly catching our attention, but Netflix, Google Maps, name your favorite app, it has some form of traditional AI sort of on the back end of it. And so
can I stop you for a second? When you say traditional AI, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, so I think maybe we can use different words. So
Sure.
if I said things like data science, or if I said things like decision-making systems, if I said that 3 years ago, you'd be like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's, I'm gonna put under let's call it traditional AI. This generative AI wave is what we're all confronting now, where we have stochastic parrots, we have rocks that now talk to us, that kind of thing, and try and figure out how to make sense of the world when a rock can talk to us. But I actually come to this from a pretty optimistic lens in the grand scheme of things. And yes, there are a lot of problems we have to talk about. We have to talk about bias in the systems. We have to talk about what happens to our labor markets. We have to talk about all these things that might occur as these systems get deployed in the world. There's questions of power dynamics of, we live in a world right now where power has shifted from people who are strong to kings to politicians to people with money to now people who deploy technology. So we have to deal with all these huge seismic epic things that are happening in our society, but I still come out optimistic, frankly, because there are rooms like this who want to have conversations about it. Because I feel these technologies are not yet locked in stone. There's a whole desire to make it sound inevitable that these technologies will roll out into the world. But I like to say to rooms like this and to people like you that our voices actually matter. We can actually have a way to shape how these technologies impact kids, families, etc. And we need to be having these conversations and learning more about it. So my optimism comes from the fact that people like us ask questions, and are challenging, and are now making our voices heard. And there are patterns of this semi-working right now. I mean, if we think about the last wave of emerging technology, like social media maybe, Instagram has been effectively forced into putting teenage controls into place because parents, et cetera, have been talking out, because they've gotten the attention of legislatures. So I think I come up from the optimistic side because I still think we can make change here.
To build on that, Afua, can I ask you just what Raffi was just saying about Instagram, for example? What do you think we should be talking about? What should policymakers, their key considerations be when thinking about integrating AI solutions into programs, when we're particularly thinking about supporting underrepresented communities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this example of Instagram, Raffi, and how Instagram now has you can opt in for, I think, the teen profiles, and they have a host of other safety features that they've been rolling out lately. But why I find that such a powerful example when it comes to policymakers is because for a long time, for a decade or so, a lot of tech companies, and again, I'm an engineer, my friends worked at those companies, I have done work for these companies as well, have said that it is your responsibility as an individual to figure out how to keep yourself safe on social media. It is your responsible as an individual with everything else that you are balancing with your life, with your family, with your budgets, with your job and everything else, to figure out how to navigate a tool that has billions of dollars behind it and a large marketing budget and large engineering systems. And it is your individual responsibility to somehow fight against these systems that are designed to pull you in and to keep you engaged in the tools in these ways, and in ways that can amplify hatred and many others. But what's nice about this action from Instagram is that it is showing that the companies can actually design the technology differently. That the companies can actually design technology better in ways that actually center humans and center how we can have our livelihood. I might have a dream that it's not just teens who need to have better design systems, but perhaps all of us, but we can get there eventually, hopefully. But I think that is the question for policymakers, is how do policymakers use their leverage to push on tech companies to design better systems overall so that the technology that we all use, regardless of where we come from, works for all of us, that it literally sees all of us. And I think that as individual policymakers or different departments departments or agencies that you all may be in and you're representing, I think some of the ways that you can think about how to use AI specifically is to first keep in mind what your mission is. Your mission is serving people. Your mission is responding to different issues that are going on. That is what is always most important. When I work with organizations, I say, let's keep your mission in mind. Let's recognize that some of the things that people turn to AI for being problem solvers or being efficient or being customer-centered, are the things that people who lead mission-driven organizations already do. And so let's figure out what's most important. Let's figure out where there's friction in different systems, whether that's in how quickly people can respond, whether that's in how much data you can go through, whether it's in how you do your outreach and how you do your follow-up. And let's start there. For where there's friction in systems, let's see what tools that we have available to solve some of that friction. And in some cases, the answer will be AI. In some cases, it won't be. But for those cases where it is AI, let's experiment. Let's see what features are out there that we can turn on in the products that we already have. Let's see what new technology we can acquire. And let's experiment. Because for me, it's really about, if we believe in the mission of our organizations, then we should believe in doing it for as many people as to the best of our ability. And so let's bring all of the tools to bear on these challenges. And in some cases, that's going to be AI.
So remembering your mission is the key one, right? And I
Remembering
think
a
that
mission.
oftentimes when we think about technology, a lot of those, it's easy to kind of lose sight of that, right? And Justin, I wanted to ask you about how this looks like when you're talking about working with government agencies. This summer, you had an incredible convening with 26 states in DC where you sort of built out this capacity development roadmap to basically just map out how this could work to prepare government agencies for implementing emerging technologies. Can you just give us some highlights from that? I know we're gonna try to make that available to everybody here, everyone who's here, so you'll get more detail about this, but can you just give us some of the highlights?
Yeah, thank you. Like I mentioned earlier, I come at this through the lens of health and human services systems, and so we did have a wonderful convening through the Center for Public Sector AI this summer, where we did have 26 states plus DC in my hometown of Oklahoma City, which was just fantastic to host friends and colleagues. I think an interesting sort of big picture observation was the Center for Public Sector AI was founded a little defensively. The idea was a recognition that this new technology was coming, and oh my gosh, government is always so far behind, and we're always playing catch up, and we see that today in the work, in the issues around social media. You know, my daughter turned 17 today, and we go through all the social media things, and so there was a desire by HHS leaders to ensure that we were in front of this powerful technology in the most important systems in our country. And so at this convening, the sort of broad observation after meeting with dozens of vendors who are big companies in this space and with each other and partners is that we're not yet behind. And that was a really empowering takeaway, because now we could, instead of playing defense, we could go on offense and build foundation to do this the right way. And so the specific question was, what were some of the takeaways around capacity that government needs to build in order to do this the right way? And there was a list of, 10 or 12 or so recommendations. I'll just name a couple real quick that I think are probably relevant to most of the folks in the room, not just to government. There was a group that was a little more tactical of recommendations, like governance structures, those sorts of things, that were really powerful. In fact, one of them was around the concept of building an innovation structure. We all believe that if we're doing this the right way in the long term, use cases for emerging technologies shouldn't come only from the top 2 or 5 people in a huge government agency. They should come from the frontline workforce, and they should come from the people who are being served by these systems. And so that requires this innovation structure that comes in with really the first principle is being humility. Like, we know a lot of things, but at the same time, you all who are doing the work and are in the systems know much more as to where you want to use this technology. And so, like, that's a piece. It feels tactical at first, much more transformative and systemic. But it's all around governance, decisioning, project management, all of those sorts of things. There was a a tech talent role in this, in that, these are huge vendors the massive companies who are going to be doing these projects. And there needs to be a real translation role. I think we refer to it as a bridge between the programs. I mean, talking about the really important work in child welfare or in safety net programs. And there needs to be a translation role to those big tech vendors to make sure that what they're building
So when
really
you're saying,
meets.
so when you're saying translation, do you mean that the needs are being met, or that the technology needs are understood, or all of the above?
I would say the concept is when a big firm is building a tool for an agency, the agency and the team's voice should be in the constant development all the way through. And so because I meet with tech companies all the time, they really don't know more than about the first 1,000 feet of 30,000 feet of what's involved in social services and health and human services. So we need to be regularly represented in the development of the technology. The last piece, as happens frequently, Afua already beat me to it, the concept of culture development, knowing your values and your principles. We believe that artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies is potentially a very disruptive force. And with any disruptive force, if you know the reason for your existence and your purpose beforehand, it's likely an opportunity to go deeper with your values and principles, to truly embed them in your work. And so if you don't know this, and honestly, there are lots of big systems who are just existing for regulatory purpose. And that's really not the right approach. You've got to walk in knowing why you and your team are there so that you can go much deeper with your values with this incredible technology. So,
Raffi, I see you're nodding your head a lot, so I'm going to ask you a question, but if you want to respond to anything that has also been said, please feel free. But we've been talking about government sectors. I wanted to ask you about private sector philanthropy. Are there partnerships there that should be playing a role in developing AI solutions for families in particular? And if you can highlight any collaborations that you want this room to know about, that would be great too.
Yeah, I mean, so I work at the Emerson Collective. So for those of you who don't know what Emerson does, we're a pretty multifaceted and unique organization. So on one hand, we actually have a philanthropy team, supports something like 300 organizations nationwide every single year. We also have a venture capital team that deploys a lot of money into the private sector space. We're usually centered around things like immigration, education, climate change. But we also have my team. I'm a technology team. We have a media team. They own The Atlantic magazine. So we try to figure out all the different ways to sort of look at problems. And one of the bets that we've been playing out for the past couple of years, because you have to be, I think, to Justin's point, you have to be like really multilingual in order to navigate these spaces. Like you have, like for me, that's what the tech translator is someone who can actually speak the subject matter expert domain and the technology domain. And finding the people who can do that's really hard. So the question is, do you train technologists to be subject matter experts, or you train subject matter experts to be technologists? And obviously the answer is somewhere in between. Like it's not black and white, but trying to find the people who are curious, who are interested, who are excited, who can then figure out how to bridge that gap is super important. And so what we think the role of philanthropy looks like in these type of conversations is, we've stated an opinion. Our opinion is that AI, for the most part, is a useful technology that we should all be looking at. It's a future of a lot of different ways that we're going to work. Maybe it's not a sole thing, but it's going to be embedded in a bunch of different places. So we've been trying to figure out how to help different organizations along that path. Not by no means saying you need. I talk to lots of organizations that have boards of being like, I want an AI strategy. By no means am I saying like come up with an AI strategy. Just more, can you be AI curious? Can we just sort of like ask questions around what might be possible, what might not be? So from the philanthropy point of view, we've done a few different things. Like one, we've actually tried to embed technologists with nonprofit organizations working in like working with their executive director, for example, and just sort of shadow the executive director for a day, being like, what did you do today? Could AI help in that situation? So, for example, we bump into lots of people writing job descriptions. I'm like, maybe take a first pass use ChatGPT to write a first pass, not the last pass, but the first pass of a job description, see if there are opportunities there. Basically trying to cultivate some kind of curiosity within organizations. Because to both of my esteemed partners' points, like these solutions are not going to come from the top. They're going to come from people actually doing the work. So trying to build a culture that it's fine to experiment. It's fine to try different things. It's fine to find these opportunities to actually see whether or not these tools can play a real role there. So, we've worked with people like Common Sense Media and OpenAI to like help them with deploying their guidelines for how AI tools can look in the world. We've sponsored a bunch of challenges for AI and families to try to figure out, are there concrete problems that AI could be used for, driven by mostly the kids, and try to see whether or not they can actually come up with interesting ideas using these technologies. We've also worked with researchers to just look at the problem slightly differently. So we all talk about call centers being eradicated, jobs being eradicated, but what if we instead use technologies to make call center operators have superpowers? For example, Roz Picard is a professor at MIT who studies a lot about what's called emotional computation, so like how to get a computer to understand your emotions. Sounds freaky, but the way that it plays out in the call center could be really interesting. What if a call center operator didn't have to take 5 angry people in a row, because most times call centers are distributed kind of semi-randomly depending who calls in first. It goes to a call center operator. What if you could detect the emotions of the people who are calling in and load balance it across all the people in the call center? It would help with mental health of call center workers. It would do all these things. So there are just opportunities to look at the problem slightly differently, but you would never know it unless you're curious and playing with it. So that's where I think like philanthropy sort of like plays in. It's just like, can we give you the gift of time in some ways to actually try and experiment and play with these things?
So as we're talking about building this culture, Justin, can I ask how you envision seeing AI bridging gaps in public services for families?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so many examples already brought up here. I think about this really at 2 sort of categories of government. This may be too simplistic, but it's the frame through which I look. I think we have transactional government, and then we have supportive government. And the idea is sometimes I just go to my DMV or Department of Public Safety to get a driver's license renewed, and that's transactional government. Sometimes I go to big systems like Health and Human Services for a transaction, but HHS is really there to to be supportive for citizens, long-term relationships that are really important in really deep systems. And so what we're starting to see is implementations more on the transactional side. So we think about contact centers. By the way, the idea of directing traffic based on emotion, we've received 150,000 calls a month at DHS in Oklahoma, and the burnout is incredible because there's the need on the other end of the phone is so acute. So anyways, it's those sorts of things. It's contact centers. There are lots of states who are starting to pilot with ChatGPT and with Gemini and just giving their employees licenses with some parameters to see how they use them. Writing job descriptions is a perfect example. And so they're AI curious at this point. And I think that's really powerful as a first introduction because it allows us to build our muscles and the cultures around doing this the right way. But in supportive government, that's where I see things as the most exciting. I wouldn't suggest that there's any real, maybe with one exception, implementation happening in that space. There's a lot of hesitation by HHS leaders to go down the road of using AI and other emerging technologies in spaces in which it may be rights impacting. And that's a term that we use frequently, but there are starting to be conversations about how we can use it in supportive government. Think about navigation of resources. So DHS in Oklahoma, small to mid-sized state, we served 1.3 million Oklahomans every year, 1.5 million Oklahomans every year. About a third of the state's population was 6,000 employees. The math does not work, right? You cannot have a relationship with the people that you're trying to serve and solve their problems. You are exclusive to one side of a transaction. If we can use the technology to shift away some of the administrative functions of those team members, they can do what they came to do and to truly help people navigate resources alongside technologies. It can allow for the sort of resurgence of local knowledge. Most of the time, to the contact center point, you call in for SNAP benefits, you're talking to somebody in another part of the state. It used to be your local DHS worker that could help you navigate other resources. That doesn't exist today because we're working towards a more efficient system nationally. But the AI tool can help you to understand what your local resources are and help you navigate those things that are available for you to meet your needs. So I do think we are going to see some real technology be deployed in the supportive side of government. We're just not there yet.
Do you all feel, just a quick question to all of you, it sounds like in a way, is there sort of a philosophy that AI can help create more time for people to focus on? Is that kind of what, it sounds like both of you are saying that.
I say absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
I'd say yes, with the caveat that you still have to train people on how to use the tools, right? So there is still an investment of time that's required. I think a lot of times in conversations about how great AI is, we can jump to like, here's the impact, forgetting that change management is real. And a lot of things die in that change management process. But once you get over that hump, you can process things more efficiently. You can direct people to the right place so that they can get the services they want more quickly. You can help them navigate the resources that are available more quickly.
So you work with, as we were saying, you work with clients to help develop, for clients that want to work with responsible data solutions. So can you tell us about the importance of the how to get to the what when it comes to how you advise organizations on developing or implementing or even investing in responsible data? And can you also just explain what you mean when we say responsible data?
Sure.
Thanks.
So when I say responsible data, I am specifically talking about human-centered systems. I dream of a world where all tech solutions are human-centered. That is not the reality of where we are now. So I think about how do we build systems that are truly human-centered and responsible to the humans that are subject to a lot of these systems. So in thinking about the how, first, of course, having a good understanding of what your mission is, having a good understanding of what some of the process that have some friction in them is really important. The next thing I think a lot about is data. A lot of these AI tools come out of the box, but to get the best use of them, you have to combine them with data from your organization. This can be employee access data, it can be customer data on where they live, how they've engaged with the systems before, what zip code they're in, what resources they're currently able to have, what resources they might be able to have access to in the future. Data can also be all of the social media posts you've made, or your letters to donors that you've written, or your annual reports, or your financial and budgetary data. All of that information is data. And we have been having conversations in government spaces and nonprofit spaces for many years now about data-driven decision-making and strong data practices. It is even more important to implement those strong data practices in the age of AI, because AI only works with access to a lot of data. And so if you don't know what data you have, it's going to be really hard to take advantage of AI systems. And so the third thing that I really work on with people is, what does your data look like? Is it segmented in the right way? Is it protected in the right way? Does it have any bias that we need to be aware of? And things like that. So I think that's the third thing. And the fourth thing is, to some of what Raffi and Justin have talked about, is that culture of experimentation. So figuring out some place where you can start small, you can try something out, you can build something, and the fifth thing then is evaluation. And so really making sure that you're evaluating, is this working? Is it working better than when we had just humans? And how are humans continuing to stay in sort of a decision-making loop? And it's not just, we trust the AI over here, and all of our humans are over here, but all of those things. So those are the 5 steps that I think about.
And I think, Afua, what you're pointing out is that we miss a lot of the nuance when it comes to AI. And Raffi, I wanted to ask you about that. Especially when we're thinking about what can be built, what do you want people in this room to be thinking about, especially when it comes to access or learning resources?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Afua said. I think like the things, we need to also find other verbs besides just build when it comes into space, because I feel like
What's another? Give me another one.
yeah, I mean, we're not all going to be builders when it comes to AI. Like we're going to be like, I mean, we're going to be users. I hate the word using because the word user is only used by like drug companies and by tech companies. But like, we're going to be like users of this technology. We're going to be. We're going to be, but we also need to be activists. We also need to organize. We also need to and organize not just in the sense of like get our voices together, but organize in preparation for AI technologies to be showing up on our data sets and things like that. So I think like searching for those other verbs, I think is really key importance. But I think education is where it really starts on the forefront. Like we can be building systems to be helping the people that we serve find that curiosity, find the opportunity to try something, build small learning communities amongst themselves to share what works, what doesn't work. You know, I want to live in this, my mythical future is, you know, Finland in 2018, before ChatGPT, actually did this nationwide webinar. They were hoping to get 1% of the country to watch a webinar on AI. They got 10% of the country to watch a webinar on AI. Now, Finland is like New Jersey, or it might be more like a club than a country kind of thing. But if you can get entire communities to be curious together, that could be really powerful, because then we could start to really explore what are the problems that we really want to solve, what are our values and the ways that we want to solve them. So I feel like finding ways to have these educational opportunities and to share that knowledge, I think those are the structures that we could be building.
So we have talked about so many things here. I want to move to a lightning round before we open it up to audience questions. But I just want to ask all of you, and anyone can go first here. When we're looking towards the future, what capacity needs to be developed within organizations and communities to move forward here? We've talked a lot about that. In different ways, but is there anything in particular that we haven't mentioned in order to think about harnessing the true potential of AI?
From my perspective, what I've seen with our government leaders is this concept of authentic collaboration. You know, our folks come together and they wrestle with the big issues, and they're also coming together to possibly do projects together. And so this concept of collaboration is really important with like-minded and mission-focused individuals. So, I mean, I see a lot of them in this room. I don't understand. I mean, I don't see why there shouldn't be groups coming together to do this across state lines and organizational lines. And then the last piece I'll add is I use this word. Some people find it weird, but it's organizational intimacy. And to me, the idea is bridging organizations who are focused on the same mission to do things together. And so those two things, authentic collaboration and organizational intimacy.
That's good. I like that.
All right, you didn't think it was weird. That's good.
I mean, I didn't say that. It's still good, still good. I guess before I answer that, how many people here would consider themselves to be technologists or like technology savvy? Okay, we have, I could count on my fingers and toes probably the number of people who raise their hand. And so I would say my encouragement then to the folks in this room is to recognize that part of doing your job and part of serving your communities is technology. It is 2024. In caring about people is caring about their data. There are too many technology systems that dictate how people get access to resources, the ways that you collect information and store information in your own organizations can actually put people at risk, financial risk, physical safety risk if someone hacks into that system and gets access to those data points. How people then show up and are able to access other resources or to navigate through school and other places is also tied to a lot of the data that is collected on them, and how then AI systems certainly use that information. So you have to start to recognize how technology is integral to how you do your work. So I would say that a capacity that needs to be built is not, I'm not asking you to, now go out and get a degree in computer engineering. Trust me, you don't need that. But to become a little bit more fluent and a little bit more curious and a little bit more willing to have conversations with technologists, because again, caring for your community is caring about the technology and caring for the data.
I'll build on that. So I 100% agree. I'll also go back to my previous point of just like curiosity is one of the biggest things. And in order to make it a safer space inside your organizations, like I recognize like some policies need to be put in place, some like guidelines need to be put in place. I'll figure out a way to share somehow with all of you, but like at Emerson, we actually wrote a draft AI policy that we recommended all our nonprofit partners deploy internally. But we also said, like, fork it, change it, do whatever you want with it, but here's like a good framework that you can start with. And I feel like those kind of frameworks also give you all permission and like sort of like the right guardrails around PII and other information, so you can still be curious in the right zones and the right spaces internally. So I feel like that curiosity, but maybe like shepherded correctly, is like the biggest thing.
So we've talked about so many things here. I've been taking notes on a few things that kind of stuck with me that I wanted to share with you all. The first is we don't want to be how the trash collects. We have to remember that. So we don't want to just be blown about by the wind. And it's important to know your values and remember your mission as you're building an emerging technology structure that allows for innovation, which requires humility, but also being multilingual. And I think the most important question we've asked is, can you be curious, right? And we've been talking about that since yesterday evening, but we're not just builders, we're users, we're activists, and we're curious people. So with that, I want to turn it over to the audience for questions. We have mic runners, and please introduce yourself if you could, and let's start up here.
Good morning, Marla Dean. Ian Brenner of the Eurasia Group said that one of the concerns he has about the conversation around AI is that we talk about it as if it's a tool when it's really an agent. And so tools we control, AI has the ability to control us. I wonder how you're thinking about that in your conversations and in your work.
I can start. Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea of the tool versus agent and what we can control versus what controls us. I would say that the way that generative AI tools are available to you now, they are giving you input based on what the output they give you is based on the input that you have given it. Both the data sources that it's trained on, something like ChatGPT, which is broadly trained on the internet, which may or may not be a good place, depending on what sections of the internet you're in, but also the additional information that you give it. So I think first is recognizing there's that piece. I think the other thing that's really important to recognize is that critical thought, critical thinking, and human controls are still really important in AI tools. So I have not yet, I don't foresee myself advocating for any AI tools that are make all of the decisions and then you immediately implement solely based on the AI tools. There should still be a human involved in that loop, right? Think of AI as part of your decision-making loop. I think for some implementations of, some suggested implementations of AI, where it's, if you just run this sentiment analysis on all of your meeting notes that this AI system took, now anyone who doesn't go to that meeting can know not only what was said, the key points, but also how people felt about it in that meeting. And something like that, I'm like, it's kind of problematic, because if in some meetings I say, if it works for you, it works for me. That means one thing. In other contexts, if it works for you, it works for me, definitely means it does not work for me, right? And so if you are just trusting an AI tool that has been broadly trained on one portion of the population, then your other decisions would be wrong. So you still need to make sure that you have the critical thinking and AI as part of your decision-making loop. Then I think you can use AI as a tool and not as an agent that is something that's controlling you.
Let's go back there. I don't know, yeah. And then there's just one stood for, then we can have that be next, yeah, thanks.
sometimes the barrier to access, so I'm Georgia Miarton, and I used to lead South Carolina's early childhood agency, was in the public sector with you, Justin, for many years, and now I'm in philanthropy at a community foundation in South Carolina. So sometimes the barrier is procurement. Sometimes the barrier is we are small nonprofits on the ground doing the work. So can you talk a little bit about models of shared services that help us bridge into all of these incredible tools and products that can feel really overwhelming and hard to access?
Great question. So the first thing that comes to mind when you use the word procurement, it's the biggest issue in government, and it's not even close. And so that is a major challenge from moving to a smaller organization where the resources are finite. I think the idea of coming together in a collaborative venue like this is one that may allow for sharing of resources with an organization that has a common mission. I think it is to at least be AI curious. It is cost effective, at least for a small organization, from my perspective. But to me, the next step in making a financial justification is identifying proper outcomes. So it's not just moving from AI curiosity to full-scale implementation without knowing why you're doing it, and that there is a financial return opportunity. So that's what comes to mind for me. I don't know that there's a really strong collective at this point, except that there are, through my lens, there are lots of state leaders who are trying to do the same thing, and they have big budgets. And so it's a challenge that not only small organizations face, but large ones as well.
Maybe I'll chime in for a second. From a philanthropy side, I mean, we've been funding a bunch of these, I'm not going to call them vendors, but I'm going to call it like shared service opportunities, things like TechSoup and others that can actually provide ways for smaller nonprofits to get access to this technology. And then those organizations can do collective purchasing and all this stuff together, but also provide training in a bunch of different ways. So I think there are these small organizations that are popping up. We need more of them because I recognize I can't ask all of you to have a CTO, for example, but having access to a fractional one or having access to someone who can actually be that multilingual person at these organizations. So TechSoup is the one that comes to mind because it's one that I fund, actually.
So how else would people find out about those?
Yeah, no, we need to do a way better job
Okay.
of distributing information. So like, they're the Microsofts of the world, like they actually have started making recommendations to go talk to these smaller vendors as opposed to talking directly to Microsoft as a way, it makes both sides happier. Like Microsoft doesn't actually speak the language of the nonprofit and doesn't want to deal with the smaller companies, and TechSoup can fit those groups. So we need to work on better ways to advertise these opportunities.
Yeah, I'll just echo on that. I actually worked with Microsoft on building some AI-specific resources. So if you go to Microsoft Philanthropies, there's a little section there. Also, you mentioned TechSoup, which I think is a great organization. Another one that I want to lift up is N10, which is an organization that does technology for movement-driven organizations. They actually just launched an AI resources portal sometime in the past 2 weeks. I don't remember exactly when. But that's a good place where it's got different training material. It has different ways to connect to people who are various size organizations who are struggling with this, what's working, what's not working, and connect to different vendors.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Laura Zumdahl. I lead New Moms in Chicago. And my question that I'd love a little more commentary on is a little bit of a version of that, which is kind of this last mile problem, right? So I would call us a little bit AI curious at New Moms. And I think what we've learned is that it takes both capital and this translation of technology to really make it happen in your organization when you want to bring these tools in and use them, and we do. But I think what we find is that organizations really have to have that outside help often to really bring them in and then make sure that you're using them effectively, and you need oftentimes significant capital to take these products on the market and to be able to use them. And I think we've got a room full of organizations that really could use a lot of these tools to be more effective and efficient in their work in a lot of ways, with some of the caveats that we talked about today, right? But I think we have to figure out, how do we help organizations that are going to be the smaller ones take these tools that are on the market, find them, figure it out, and then actually put them to use, because it takes a lot of capacity sometimes that organizations don't have on staff, right? And that's where we sometimes have this gap that's out there, and without figuring out how to fix that last mile problem, that's going to be the trick, I think, for
Right.
our sector.
So I guess maybe what do you think about last mile problems? And we've talked about a little bit of it, but is there anything else that you want to offer to folks here as what they're thinking about last mile?
I'd say we should listen to our philanthropist on this for what can be funded.
Okay, Raffi.
I mean, yes, we definitely need to do better work, and I would actually love to talk to all of you on like how we can find better ways to make that happen. I will say that this is going to sound like a cop out, but it's not actually truly a cop out. But I've been in talking to a bunch of our nonprofit partners, there is a lot to be said about the younger volunteers and the younger staffers that are coming onto these organizations, like people who are also already in that AI curious or potentially even AI native space. That like figuring out, I wouldn't necessarily trust a younger staffer to go do everything. Figuring out first at the executive director level, like what is our values, what are the things we're trying to achieve. But I think these younger staffers who are now using ChatGPT in schools, ChatGPT in all these other aspects of their lives, I think there is an opportunity there. We need to do a better job also figuring out how to educate this next generation of kids that are coming out of colleges, because when I went to engineering school more than 20 years ago, the kinds of things that we talked about in problem sets were like ad systems and things like that. And we need to shift that entire conversation to be talking about social sector issues, talking about how to actually make education better, how do we actually fix the immigration space, and making those the problem sets of engineering students moving forward. Granted, that's a medium-term solution, not the short-term one, I admit
But
that.
it sounds like you're saying that using young people almost in the translation role here would be an obvious solution.
I believe that to be 100% true.
Sure. Okay. Okay, right there.
Oh,
and
great.
then here.
So, thank you. For the longest time, Health and Human...
Uma, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Uma Aluwalia. I am a consultant now, but still a recovering public servant. I miss it. But what I wanted to ask was, for the longest time, HHS has struggled with this duality of data security and data sharing. It is a struggle constantly to try. We want to collaborate more, but then we talk about HIPAA and 42 CFR and FERPA, and we stop in our tracks. Not that they can't be done, but you sort of have to have some great intentionality and willing partners, right? Does AI change that in any way for all of us? Can it? And if so, what should we be thinking about?
Uma, great question. I think it does, only because it opens up the universe of what people are interested in talking about. Prior to when you talk about data governance and sharing, it was a pretty quick wall between agencies. So I think we first are starting with a group of leaders. Again, I point back to Health and Human Services, who control a lot of different systems. And so just by pure willpower, they can make data sharing happen, at least within their own agencies. And especially now that they're part of the culture that we're developing as a nation in Health and Human Services is being outcomes driven. And so if you tie the concept and the need to share data with actually achieving an outcome for families, it's a lot easier to embrace other systems as well. So we can prove it works in our own, set goals together with other organizations, and then that opens the door. I also think that there is an incredible amount of value in bringing in those other organizations into the mission. We at DHS in Oklahoma experienced a lot of that hesitation to share data and prioritize our projects with our central purchasing and IT agencies. And then I brought them to a location where we're serving people and talked about how it all works and really brought the technologists into the mission of Health and Human Services. And then all of a sudden doors started opening and agreements started coming out. So I do think AI gives us a catalyst to share data with each other. And then also another thing that's important is we talk about young people. Well, in government, we're training young people on COBOL. So like it's a different situation, right? Green screen, no mouse, and it's older than I am, and we're training our new people. But the idea around AI is allowing us to open the door to other technology modernizations that we should have been doing for decades. And so I think just this overall wave is nothing but beneficial.
Sorry, you go. I'm going to be just a bit of a contrarian for the data privacy piece, because some of the ways that some of these generative AI tools work is that any data you give it, it then adds to its broader training set. So any sort of private data you have, any of the HIPAA protected data that you have, any of these data that you have that are governed by hopefully the data privacy policies that you have well documented and that you all follow to every, at least to the extent that's required by law, that they go back into the broader training model. So you want to make sure that if you are selecting some of these tools, that you are selecting tools that explicitly do not train on user data, which is the language that would be written in the terms and conditions or somewhere on that chain. So I would say that is a big concern. There are some, I think ChatGPT, for example, does train on user data. Something like Claude doesn't by default. I think you can pay for ChatGPT, so it won't. But that is one thing that I would be wary of in this environment with sensitive data.
And maybe I'll throw on one more, which is this goes back to my what are other verbs. Like, you all need to be advocates for our communities, especially when it comes around data privacy and issues. HHS comes to mind specifically because it's not just questions about ChatGPT and others, but AI is opening up this conversation of just like, what if I had access to even more information from you? So, I've had conversations with HHS and Planned Parenthood around period trackers and whether or not that data should be stored in the cloud or stored on your phone. So I think questions around this of the privacy of a family, the privacy of a child, the privacy of an individual, we are the advocates for that, and we need to make sure that that kind of voice and that kind of thought is known, that that kind of information should remain with us and should not be sucked into these larger systems.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name's Monica Barzak. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And thank you all for a very extremely thought-provoking conversation this morning. Justin, when you were talking about DHS and sort of how the math doesn't work, like how many calls DHS would receive compared to how many staff, it made me think about something I've been reading about in media lately around AI responding through health portals and communicating with people instead of a doctor, for example, and especially around, there's an exchange I've been reading about with delivering bad news. And so I'm not advocating what I'm about to ask, I'm being curious. What are, I guess, maybe any of your thoughts when we think about 2Gen? There's a similar math problem, right? Where really coaching and digging deep with your families and supporting families, that math doesn't tend to work at a certain point in time. What would be your thoughts around some type of supportive relationship like that being driven through AI in some way?
Well, I hope we get to the stage in which the AI is a companion in a three-way conversation. And that conversation should be between a human in a health and human services or social services organization. It doesn't have to be a government agency. It could be a community partner or a faith-based organization or something like that. But the AI is a companion to help make sure that the proper resources are provided. It seems challenging to think about the AI being the only source of guidance for a family going through a difficult time, whether it's in a health situation or wrestling with poverty or something like that. So I'm really hopeful, and I think there's some vision being laid out around that AI is a third party, not the primary voice.
Yeah, and just building on that for this case for healthcare, but I think broadly thinking about AI tools and AI companions, if you will, it doesn't have to be either or. It's not all. I would say it should you decide on something that's either all AI or all human, right? You could conceive of a world where perhaps introductory conversations around scheduling or around finding more sort of technical information out might be enhanced with an AI tool. But if you're getting some really bad news or devastating news, for me anyway, to get, this AI bot has now told you have cancer, yay, would be horrible, right? And so there's somewhere along the continuum where it should be kicked over. I would say it should be kicked over to a human. And so I think, like I said to someone's question earlier, I can't remember who, think about AI as part of an overall system. It's not just AI, it's not just humans, but it's together. How do we figure out, again, how to serve more people, how to deliver the best services, how to care for people in the best way?
Raffi, you want to add any final thoughts here?
No, I mean, there is a lot of evidence that these AI bots allow people to deal with traumatic events in a way that allows them to process it. By no means am I saying licensed therapists should be taken out of the equation. I love my therapist. But there is a lot of evidence that shows that, that people are vulnerable in a different way when it comes to these types of systems. But I fully agree with Afua. These are larger socio-technical questions. This is not a technical question, it's not a socio-technical, it's a socio-technical thing that we need to think about and design properly.
Well, I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. I know there were more, but we have a break now. So if everybody's here, and you can come up and ask them questions also. But I just want to thank our panelists for being here with us this morning. Raffi, Afua, Justin. Thank you.